Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show I have Mark from Yesterworld joining me to discuss the Indiana Jones adventure at Disneyland. Hello, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Hey Jeff, thanks for having me.
I gotta say, there are a lot of YouTube Disney history, theme park history shows out there, but I say this with all the sincerity in the world. Yours is easily among my favorites. Like, your show on there, it's fantastic, and I just applaud you for that at the top of this show. It's really, really wonderful, and if anybody listening hasn't checked out Yesterworld on YouTube, I highly suggest it. So why don't you tell folks a little bit about it so that they know about it if they haven't heard about it before.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. It's always very humbling because to me it's weird to be doing something that I have always been, like movies and theme parks have always been like my two passions. So it's just crazy to think to have any sort of quote unquote career, if you can call it that, I guess, like doing something that you love so much. Because I, just have always researched theme park stuff, even from when I was like a kid, and I was never, it's just been amazing to be able to like translate that into something bigger. But yeah, on the channel we explore entertainment of the past, primarily theme parks. I kind of in the beginning started doing kind of like the three main forms of entertainment to me, which was video games, movies, and theme parks, with an emphasis on theme parks. And then that just became more of the primary, that was what resonated the most with people. I think because theme parks, especially at the time, weren't as well covered in the YouTube space, whereas movies, there were already a million YouTube reviewers and history, people covering movies. So yeah, mostly we cover theme park subjects of the past, abandoned attractions, abandoned effects, really things that I use the word abandoned a lot, but just things that, once was and now are no longer. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. And they kind of range from Universal to Disney and more just those two, looking to expand a little more outside of just Disney and Universal. But those are the parks I've always had the most passion for. So that's where I've always gravitated towards in terms of telling, stories about history and things maybe people didn't know that used to be there before their time or even my time,
Excellent. And today we're going to, as I mentioned, talk about the Indiana Jones adventure, which you are extremely passionate about. So let's jump to that conversation right now.
It's time to dive into today's Disney Dialogue.
All right, so the Indiana Jones Adventure Temple of the Forbidden Eye opened at Disneyland Park in March of 1995, and this was the first new attraction in Adventureland since the Enchanted Tiki Room in 1963, which is crazy.
It's crazy.
1963 to 1995, like, that's a huge gap.
Yeah, well, I think it's tough because there's just such limited space, between Main Street over here and then you have Frontierland. So it's I imagine it was quite, because I know they had to even shorten down the track layout of Jungle Cruise just to fit in Indiana Jones. So obviously it's not like they were lush with, excess space,
Yeah, it is interesting that you mentioned that because, recently we went through this whole closure of the Disneyland Railroad to change that track to make way for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which of course everybody has a fit about.
Yep.
and it's just like, well, this is nothing new. It's been done many, many times.
Right.
In the past, and that's a great example. Jungle Cruise being shortened for the Indiana Jones adventure, and I don't think anybody's regretting that this decision. I don't know. Maybe somebody is. Write in if you want and let me know. But in any case, this really was part of Michael Eisner's Disney decade, and when he started taking over the company, there was just just not a ton of rides for like teenagers and such.
Right.
And he felt it was important to bring in certain franchises that would get that crowd in the park and get them excited. And obviously you're excited about this attraction. I am curious, why is this one of your favorite attractions?
Well, probably because, number one, I've always been, like I said, theme parks and movies are kind of like my two biggest passions in life. Probably movies more so, but that's just because I don't know. I was into theme parks before movies, but when I saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was 13, then I was obsessed with movies and wanted to be a director. So theme parks were always like second to that. But as being passionate about movies, I grew up, kind of idolizing Steven Spielberg and George Lucas for the most part. Not counting the prequels or later in life, I kind of had a different interpretation of those, but I loved them as a kid. But I was always obsessed with Steven Spielberg movies, E.T., Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones. That's the reason why. So probably more so. And I think I loved the attraction as a kid as just it being a really fun ride. And then as I hit my teens and my passion for film grew and for the Indiana Jones, the original trilogy grew, I just learned to appreciate the ride even more and all the work that went into it. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like it's one of the most, I guess it's subjective, but to me, it's the most immersive experience of any theme park. And I haven't been to any of the Tokyo Disneylands or Paris or anything. So I'm speaking just from Walt Disney World and Disneyland. But to me, from beginning to end, from the second you enter that queue, you're immersed into the world, or not even the world, but just the atmosphere that the Indiana Jones films created. And you really do feel like you're inside of a lost temple, and you really feel like the myth is real. You don't feel like it's some shoehorned, corny plot device. The way they implemented Mara and the legend and everything into that, and just the queue alone, that's what boggles my mind. It's like the queue, when you get to the end of the queue, and if they said, okay, that was the attraction, even that alone is like a ride in itself in a way.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because from what I've been told, I haven't done the research to like confirm this or deny it, but somebody told me back before the attraction was complete, they actually had an annual pass holder event, and the event was simply going through the queue.
Yep. Yeah, they did that just to see, because Tony Baxter, I think, told that story as part of a panel. They did that just to get impressions, which is unheard of today. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have someone go through the queue and be like, okay, that's, because the ride is usually, 75% or more of the experience. But the queue is just such a huge part of it that it makes sense. And of course, to build up buzz, to be like, if the queue is that amazing, the ride's got to be even crazier, which, it is. And yeah, I've just always been obsessed with that attraction and the scale of it. When you first come out of the, I think it's officially called the Tunnel of Torment, and you see, the bridge and I can't think of another attraction that's on that level of the wow factor of they built this from scratch. This is all enclosed. Just that's the scale of that entire showroom. Again, I haven't been on other big attractions like Journey to the Center of the Earth or Mystic Manor, which I would love to one day. But in terms of my experience, I just have never ridden anything that's matched that. Forbidden Journey came really close at Universal, because that's also a very impressive ride with a lot of practical and tangible effects and show scenes.
Yeah, you mentioned the room with when you turn the left corner and you see the bridge and you see the huge cavernous room that you're in. And I'd say like that reveal is as grand to me as the big reveal in Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland when you're in all the caves and then all of a sudden you see the pirate ship and like the living pirates and stuff. And like that reveal is always so cool. And it's so funny because, once you've gone on these attractions a billion times, you kind of forget how amazing those reveals are until you're with somebody who has never done it. And they're just like, oh my god, like, oh yeah, that is an amazing reveal. And that's what I would compare that to, would be that scene in Pirates. So
yeah, and that's another really. I live in Orlando now, and so the Walt Disney World's version of Pirates isn't quite as immersive because it's kind of a Spark Notes version because of that whole Thunder Mesa story and everything. But in terms of Disneyland's Pirates, that's probably, I would say, maybe the second. It's hard to say to compare immersion because it's very subjective, but that's also another attraction. I love the setup, going through the Blue Bayou and then going through the caverns. And then, like you said, the reveal of being thrust into the time of the pirates. And you're just like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah. It is crazy to think that Indiana Jones Adventure is now over 20 years old. And we, as theme park guests, in fact, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. Obviously, we're very excited for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And I'm just like, in a year from now, we're totally going to take it for granted. Like,
of course.
I think of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And, that was probably the most insane crowds I've ever seen or experienced for a new attraction or land or whatever. And now you can just, walk in and enjoy. Obviously, there are some days that are busy, but it's not like this insane thing. So we become jaded very quickly, is my point. Yet Indiana Jones Adventure, over 20 years later, is still like packing them in. It's still one of the most popular attractions at Disneyland Park, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and a large part of that, I think if it was just the ride itself, it still would. But again, it's that experience from when you enter that temple and you don't feel like you're entering a show building. You feel like you are entering a temple that's been there for however many years. And it just fits so well into the theming of the area. Of course, originally the Jungle Cruise was going to be implemented into, the attraction as well as the Disneyland Railroad. And obviously that wasn't quite realistic in terms of the original scale. But just the queue alone, like I can never get over just that, just walking through it without a line. What would you say? Maybe 4 or 5 minutes? If there's even at a slow pace, if there's no line buildup, it takes you a good amount of time just to get to the ride. And it never feels like a chore,
Yeah, that was obviously like, you're talking about how amazing the queue is and everything, but I'm sure at the time the Imagineers weren't very thrilled about how long the queue had to be. And the reality is it's simply that long because we have to exit the park, essentially, walk under the railroad tracks to the show building. And that's why it's such a long queue, but it kind of worked out in their favor, I would say, because as you mentioned, it takes you out of the real world when you're taking that like long journey just to experience the ride.
Yeah, so, you don't even feel like you're in the park. And like at least with maybe Pirates is probably a bad example, but I feel like with most attractions, even though you're immersed into the atmosphere of the attraction, you still feel like you're in Disneyland for the most part. But I don't know, it's something about with that, because it is so long that your mind kind of plays tricks and you think that you've gone outside, way outside of the park based on, and that's, genius Imagineering, in my opinion, of just that the ability to just completely take you out of, like Disneyland takes you out of the real world, and then an attraction takes you even more out of the real world by putting you into another,
Yeah, now you had mentioned how Jungle Cruise and the Railroad were supposed to, kind of be seen and featured in this attraction. And the reality is like this, Indiana Jones was actually supposed to take over a massive portion of Adventureland. I believe it was going to be called Indiana Jones and the Lost Expedition is what I read. And, there was going to be a second attraction. There was going to be the Mine Coaster inspired by the second Indiana Jones film, which eventually ended up in Disneyland Paris, that attraction. Yep. But due to budget cuts because of Euro Disney underperforming, the Indiana Jones attraction got a huge budget cut. So it was, whittled down to just the one attraction, which is kind of amazing if you think of. Like, we got the budget-friendly version of Indiana Jones Adventure. So can you even imagine?
Still,
Yeah.
It's just maybe in a way that's for the best because it forced them to. I think sometimes maybe it could have gone too insane, but forcing them to think a little scaled back. Because if you look at some of that concept art, it's ridiculous. I don't even know how that would have been possible. But maybe it's better that it was a little focused, into just the story around Mara. Maybe it would have been a little too messy. I don't know. I'd still love to see that, but
I love when different attractions, like I think the most obvious is the People Mover at Walt Disney World, when it goes into Space Mountain and into Buzz Lightyear and stuff. So I would have loved that for Jungle Cruise or the Railroad or something. I think that would have been very cool, but it didn't happen. But still, the concept art is quite cool. But Of course, the most important thing and the thing that you start with every attraction is the story. So let's discuss that just a little bit in case people are not familiar with this attraction. The story of Indiana Jones Adventure takes place in India in the year 1935. And essentially, Indiana Jones is lost in the temple, and we gotta go inside. So,
Yep.
How well do you think that this attraction does telling a story?
I think if you're paying attention, it does pretty well. You really do have to, well, it's mainly the projector room where you really have to be focused, and sometimes it's probably hard when you have a million guests. And there are some times, and I understand why they have to do it, but at least the last few times I went, the last year I lived in LA, a lot of the times they would hold guests right at the end of the spike chamber and then kind of just rush you through the projector room. And like, I think if of all the portions to rush someone through, that's like the worst, because that's the story where they talk about Indiana Jones going into the temple and, all the earthly riches. And, that's where basically the biggest part of the story is revealed to the to visitors and about the temple, and don't look in the eyes. But found a lot of times I was rushed through that area. We're not rushed, but I was held back to where I couldn't hear anything, and then just walked through there. So that was an interesting decision, I thought.
I will say
fire hazard or something.
These days they do tend to hold you in the projector room in the queue. So they have like it's split into two different sides, and they'll fill up a side and have you hold there for a while as the other side goes. So you do usually spend some time in that room, and that short film that they made does a pretty good job getting through the story quite quickly. I mean, I think the main thing with it is don't look into the eyes of Mara.
Right.
If that happens, stuff's gonna go wrong. But I think one of the big things with this attraction, there probably was something before it. In fact, actually, now that I think of it, I guess Tower of Terror kind of does this as well. But one of the big things is that you're part of the story with the Indiana Jones adventure. Whereas in the past, you were very much like watching the story. If you think about, Haunted Mansion or Pirates, this was just kind of next level in that respect. And I think that that's one of the coolest things about it, and one of the things that really caught people's attention. Kind of was a game changer when it comes to theme park attractions, I would say.
Yeah, and I think to me, and a lot of people, especially back when I'm talking the original version of the effect, where for the longest time I had no idea how they did the effect where, you're going into the Chamber of Destiny, and it appeared as if, each time you rode the attraction, you'd go into a different, room with a different, whether it was the Chamber of, I always forget the literal definition, but, the Chamber of Riches, the future, and then what is it? I always
Fountain of Youth.
Fountain of Youth, yeah. So it seemed as if you were always going into a completely different like ride path. And of course that was done with a very cool effect that no longer works. And now it's all digital, which I understand. I mean, it was too expensive to fix all the mechanisms that made it work. But to me, that was one of the most amazing parts of it. It really just set up the experience, having this incredible effect that you just had no idea how they pulled it off.
Yes. So essentially, for those of you who have never ridden it before, the first thing you see are three different doors, and as you mentioned, there's three different paths you can take, and it was chosen at random as to which one you would enter. And the gag is that you're entering the same hallway, but it's just different lighting, different audio that created a different experience for you. And that was another thing around this time. Like, it wasn't super common to have multiple experiences in one ride. I'm not going to say it didn't exist yet, but it wasn't super common. Obviously, these days, like that's a big part of attractions now, is creating repeatability for people. And Indiana Jones Adventure did it in a few ways. They did it, immediately with the doors, but then also Indy's dialogue throughout the attraction at a couple points could change. Mm-hmm. When the attraction first opened, the vehicles moved differently. Every ride wasn't exactly the same. I think it is all exactly the same now. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
they really, because I have of one of my like prized possessions is like a fact sheet that was handed out on like cast member previews, and for Christmas one year when I was like a teenager, my mom found like an a copy of the the handbook that they handed out.
Oh, cool.
So it's cool to see all the original effects and all the original things they used as statistics. And then quite a bit doesn't either it doesn't work or it just was abandoned. But yeah, that was part of it. They really stressed on that every experience was completely different, and I have the paper somewhere, but I mean, it was in the thousand. Let me see if I can quickly, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it said 160,000 possible combinations of programming. 160,000.
Whoa.
That's what they claimed in this document. And I don't know what it is now, honestly. But I remember people would say how violent it was. I don't have... Maybe it's because it was so violent I blocked it out. I don't know. But I don't remember it being like tremendously violent. But I've heard people say like, oh yeah, when it first opened, it was a real thrasher, and now not as much. So
it's definitely been tamed down. That is like factual that, you know, people were getting hurt and there were lawsuits and stuff. So they did tame it down. The thing I don't know is when they tamed it down, whether or not they got rid of the different actions it could take. I don't know. I was just on it the other day multiple times, and it feels like the same vehicle movements. The thing that changes kind of is where your vehicle stops while it like tries not to catch up with the vehicle in front of you. That will change every once in a while. But you mentioned the cool stuff they handed out for cast previews and stuff. Do you remember the Maraglyphics decoder card? That
yeah, I still have a few. I got some off eBay I really wish, even if it weren't a card, if there was just some way, because it's a fun thing to do when you're in the queue to look at, decode everything on the walls.
It's in the...
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's part of like the Play Disney Parks app now.
Oh, that's cool.
So you can still get it there. They did reprint them recently. Like I actually, for a long time, I had my original one because I think I went on this attraction opening year. I'm pretty sure when I was on vacation. So I had that for a long time. I did get rid of it probably as a teenager, which I regret now. But I did get a reproduction of it during the 20th anniversary panel that they had about the attraction in the park. And then I know they also reprinted them again recently for 90s night at Disneyland. Since the attraction opened in the 90s, they were handing them out that night as well. So they are kind of making a comeback to some point, but anybody can get the download on the Play Disney Parks app. So that's kind of cool. And I just remember as a kid, now I do remember as a kid, like having to wait in that entire queue. Whereas like you mentioned now, you walk through most of it. But I remember waiting long periods of time in that entire queue, and you really get bored and you start decoding that stuff. And I remember over like a water fountain, it said, you know, there were two water fountains next to each other. And choose, what did it say exactly? Do you know?
I don't remember what it says exactly, but it's something about like choose wisely or something about that.
Basically, one will kill you and one will be the fountain of youth. So,
do you think it's a fire hazard? Maybe, you know, because I know a lot of safety stuff has changed since the 90s, and I wonder if that's, you know, because I also remember waiting through the entire attraction, but now there's a lot of holding points.
Sure,
it seems at least. So I wonder if that's more of a, because it's pretty narrow. Like, you know, if you were to build it today.
Yeah, my guess is if that were the case, it would have to do with how far apart the exits are from one another. And I don't know. I've never really thought of it that way, to be honest. But that may be the reason. Either that or it's just less crowds. But Indy can get up to an hour on a pretty typical day. So I'm not sure why they don't hold you there as much. But I enjoy just walking through it. I'm not going to lie.
Like I'm having severe Indiana Jones withdrawals because I feel like I can say that since maybe I was like 10 or so, around the time it came out, I probably went on it at least every year or every other year. And then I was an annual pass holder for about 8 years in California. And I haven't gone on it in like 3 years. And that's the longest I haven't been on it since I was like 10. So I'm like itching to go back to Disneyland sometime in the near future and ride it because I miss my attraction.
But come on, you got Dinosaur where you are.
True, and a lot of darkness. We were actually, it's funny you bring that up because on the podcast I was recording yesterday, we were talking about how I was saying how originally, you know, Dinosaur was planned to be almost like the prehistoric version of Indy, where you truly felt immersed into the Jurassic period, and there was always something to see everywhere. And then because of budget cuts, which is always the case, you know, it became more of show scene, darkness, show scene, darkness, you know, so it's less immersive in my opinion.
Sure.
But it's the same track layout and same ride vehicles.
Now, we did mention the doors that no longer move. Instead, now the effect is done through map projection, which so basically you're always going through the same door. It doesn't swivel back and forth anymore, but the map projection changes, giving you the different ride options. But there are a lot of effects that used to be part of this attraction that aren't so much anymore. So I was wondering if you wanted to touch on those at all.
Yeah. Yeah, the sad thing, too, I'll say really quickly about the original effect, because, you know, it involved this, like, giant... pretty much facade of walls and fake doors. And if anyone doesn't, there's a few meme or GIFs online, and I think I even explained it better in one of my episodes about abandoned effects, because it's really impressive how they did that, how they achieved that effect of really making you feel like you entered a different chamber each time. But it's still there. That's the interesting thing. I've seen pictures of people who turned around and took a flash picture. The mechanism and the walls are still there. It's just that it broke at some point, and it was just, I've heard it was either too expensive to keep fixing it, or that the parts, like, they weren't making them. And then so they said, okay, we'll just go digitally and it'll save money. And so I understand why they went with that. And it also makes the chambers itself really cool with the effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other effects are...
Before we move on, I do want to mention something about those doors as well. You said, do you remember, like, when you're loading, you have, like, that wall of mirrors?
Yeah, the mirrors.
So the purpose of those mirrors, which I didn't really get initially, but I read somewhere, was so that wall of mirrors would kind of move back and forth as well. And the purpose of that was so that you would see the reflection of the vehicle before you going in, showing you, hey, it's a different door. And then when you go... you have a different door than the group before you did. So they really tried to sell that as part of the story. And
it's a very subtle, very, like, again, I was always very confused by that. Mm-hmm. I knew it was an effect, and I couldn't quite, it wasn't until only recently when I finally was like, oh, that's because in the documents it always says, I think it says it's listed as mirror effect. It's like, mirror effect? It's just a moving mirror. That's not really an effect. And then, yeah, but it shows just how much they were trying to sell that illusion, even by the tiniest, subtle effect that makes another effect work even better.
Yeah. Okay, so what were you going to say? What was the next effect you want to talk about?
I was going to, because the actual name of it, because it's interesting. So they called the mirror effect the moving room. They called it, so officially it's called the vortex smoke effect.
Oh, yeah.
And pretty much, yeah, where Indy is holding the doors back. I think, and you can speak about this now, I think now it's just like a fabric curtain that kind of spins in circles. Yeah,
so there's actually a few things about this. So this is the first time that we see Indiana in the attraction, and this animatronic has kind of gone through a couple different poses. I feel like it started the way it is now, where, like, Indy's leaning up against this door. So I will admit, as what I kind of didn't get as the story for a long time was Indy is keeping this door shut because that is where our vehicle is supposed to be going, because that is where Mara is sending us. We basically messed up, looked in her eyes, and she's trying to send us into this giant doorway, but Indy's saving us by keeping it shut. I honestly didn't necessarily always get that or understand that. And
yeah, neither did I.
Yeah, so
it's not very clear.
No, it's not super clear. And Indy is leaning up against the door, kind of with his right arm pushing up against it. But for a while, and I'm curious if you ever saw this, did you ever see it where it was his full back up against the doors? So he was like full on facing you frontward. It wasn't like his side anymore. And they had his full back, and he was kind of like in a crouched position moving up and down. And it was like that for a couple years, I would say. And now it's been pushed back to, the original.
Honestly, I'd have to, I have, far too many point of view videos of Indy saved on my hard drive. So I'll have to look through that, because I never noticed that particular, but now I'm really curious to see, because I never noticed him. I knew they switched out animatronics, but I didn't know that they changed up his position.
Yeah, I would say, if I had to guess, if you do go back and look, I would say it probably changed back to its original version as it currently is now about 2 years ago. And then there was probably about a 2-year period where it was like, so I checked between like 2015, 2017, or maybe I'm just insane and making this all up in my head, but I am pretty sure because I remember the first time I saw him with his back up against it, I was like, wait, this is different. Like, it was weird.
Yeah.
But as you were saying, the smoke vortex, you're right. It is like a curtain sheet now behind the door. And honestly, it often doesn't even work at all. You just kind of see the door.
That's what I noticed the last couple of times I went on. And I would love to find a really crystal clear video one day, I know it's out there, of the original vortex smoke effect. From what it's just so hard to see. I think I found like 2 videos. I even took a video of it when I was a teenager, but it's just the camera work of a monkey. I was just aiming all over the place, out of focus. But pretty much from what I can tell, based on descriptions and the little snippets I've seen, it was like this big billow of like smoke would come from the door, like, and it was illuminated in like green lighting. It was like the demons or whatever coming from the door, but there was like a vacuum that would like suck up the smoke, and so it would give this really cool illusion, almost like a movie scene, when smoke comes out of nowhere and then it like swirls and gets sucked back up. And again, like you can kind of see it in certain videos, but I'd love to see like a really crystal clear image of exactly how it worked at its prime, because it's hard to see it.
You know what I absolutely love that they added into this scene a couple years ago, I would say? Have you seen the new lighting with the Indiana Jones silhouette?
Not if it happened within the last 3 years.
I think it may have. I don't know. I know there was a big update. I think it was around 2017. When did the map projection doors come? Was that before or after you left?
That was after I left. So
Okay.
I probably would have seen it in a video, but maybe I always skip past that part.
So there's there's this really great lighting effect, very, very, very simple effect. But as you're heading toward Indy for the first time, it looks like a spotlight, like a warm spotlight, where you see the Indiana Jones, his head silhouette with the hat and everything. And as you get closer, it disappears and you see the animatronic.
That's cool.
But the silhouette shines up on the door, and that was added not too long ago. And I was like, ooh, I love that. It's a detail that like you really kind of have to be looking ahead in the attraction to really see it, or else it's going to be gone before you even recognize it. But if you catch
and that's
it,
a callback to Raiders, because that's how he appears, with Marion. I guess I assume that's, unless it's a coincidence,
wow.
when she sees his shadow. I'm totally guessing, but I would hope that is some like little imaginary Easter egg saying, oh, what if the audience's first appearance of Indy is kind of how Marion sees him when he enters the bar. Again, I could be totally making it up, but
I'm obsessed with that theory. That is fantastic, and I don't care what anybody says. That is official canon at this point. We're declaring it here on Disney Coast to Coast. I love that.
Sounds good. But that scene's gone through a lot, because I remember, I want to say it was 2012 or 13 when, I could be wrong, but there was some point when it went through a massive refurbishment, and they redid all the painting, and they redid a lot of the lighting effects in the Tunnel of Torment, as they call it. And I remember that being really impressive. The lightning strikes were so much more vibrant than they were in the early 2000s. Yeah,
the lightning strikes are great. I will say you can see too much of the floor in this scene. If you look to the left or right, you're going to see kind of metal beams and just a black painted floor underneath the wall.
That always kind of ruins the illusion.
Yeah, I was like, why aren't they hiding this better? Or just why didn't they paint it all the way? And that always drives me a little crazy. But there is something here. As we said, this attraction does a great job telling story, but I will say the more I read about this attraction stuff, there are just things that happen that I'm like, oh, I didn't really get that that's what was happening. And I'm curious if you understood this. You know that part, what do they call it? The Tunnel of Torment? Is that what you said?
That's the name on my manual for some reason.
So as you're going in there and headed toward Indiana Jones and heading toward that door that he's holding shut for us, do you ever notice how the vehicle is kind of has a floating effect? It's not rumbling against the ground or anything. It kind of feels, it's very smooth movements. Have you ever noticed this?
This
is when the lightning's striking in the walls.
You're making me want to go on it so bad right now.
Sorry.
Am I wrong in that you feel like it's smooth, and then he says turn left,
yes,
and then you feel like you're crashing?
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what the smooth part is supposed to represent, supposedly. The vehicle is supposed to be floating, and it's Mara's magic powers, like floating you toward the door.
Really?
I never got that.
Well, that's...
I read this...
Where is that? Is it...
I think it was in... Do you remember E-Ticket magazine?
Yeah, I've been collecting those.
I think it was maybe their last issue. They did an Indiana Jones Adventure one, and I'm pretty sure I read about it there, and it was like it was a Tony Baxter interview. And I remember reading that and just being like, oh, I never got that that's what was going on in that moment.
I never, it's funny because I can tell you the movement, but I never thought of it that way. I guess I just remember it being smooth. Maybe I thought it was so you could see the animatronic better, but I do remember it'd be like turn left, and then that's when you would feel like that's really fascinating. And E-Ticket magazine is incredible. Like that's for my Snow White episode. I mean, just that was invaluable, like the photos they had in there. So now I'm probably going to pick up the Indiana Jones one because I want to read up what they have on that.
Yeah, it's now they also in that same magazine. I hope I'm getting it right. I'm pretty sure that's where I read this stuff.
Probably. Yeah.
So once you exit that room and take that left turn, another thing happens with the vehicle movement, and I never got this either. And this I blame on the lighting in the attraction because I can see the floor at this, when you take that turn and you see the reveal of the bridge and everything. So you can see that it's a smooth floor. But do you remember the movement at that point is like a bumpy kind of angle down?
I always assumed you were going downstairs.
Yes. I never picked up on that until I read about it. I was like, oh yeah, that is what it's supposed to be, isn't it? So you're supposed to be driving downstairs. And like I said, you can see the floor, so to me, the effect isn't that all that effective. But once again, I think that that's an interesting little story point that was added in there. I think it's a nice detail, but I think most people probably don't pick up on that.
Yeah, especially the floating one. Like, I don't think I ever picked up on that. I guess the stair one I only did because I think there's sound effects that goes with it.
Yeah.
But that's, again, it shows just how much they were putting into the movement to help tell the story. I would be curious. I wonder if the floor is a bit lit up more again because of I feel like a lot of it sounds horrible, but it's like so many effects and things of rides go kind of the way of the dinosaur because of updated safety regulations, and that's for the best.
Yeah.
But it is kind of bittersweet when you have like Alice in Wonderland when they had to expand the tracks and put up railings, and so it's like, yes, I'm all for safety, but it is a little bittersweet when sometimes we have to see maybe part of an attraction that was made it more of an immersive experience go.
Yeah, it's funny because, obviously the saying is safety first, but I always think to myself, what if the saying was safety second? We'd have some really, really cool things, wouldn't we?
Just Disneyland or the Disney parks can have the exception of...
Yeah, on an airplane, I want safety first, but in theme parks, I think I'd be okay with safety second. I don't know.
I think it depends on the... There are some that I think are more logical than others, but then there's a point to where I think, and again, I don't work with any kind of safety company, but I imagine there's a point where they're almost looking for like, oh, this could happen in this crazy scenario. And it's like, well, what are the odds of that happening? But of course they have to take, and I agree, take guests' safety, and that should be the number one priority. But
of course,
I would imagine maybe that's why the floor is lit up more.
Yeah, maybe. Now, as we've turned that corner, there is a very famous effect here. I never saw it in person. One. I don't think many people did, but you hear about it over and over and over again. Did this one have an official name?
I'll read what since I have this in front of me, what the fact sheet reads it as. By the power of Mara's wrath, 60 pounds of rubble can fall inside the temple every 18 seconds. And I think it's just called the rubble effect in the manual, if I'm incorrect. Let me scrim strobes. So it's smoke, fire, and ice drop.
Okay.
So ice drop is the official name.
So this basically was to simulate boulders falling from the ceiling. There was a light or laser beam that would hit a certain point, and at that point, these boulders would fall by your vehicle. And it was a cool effect from what I've seen on video. And it was exactly what you said. It was ice falling instead of rock, and then the ice would fall to the ground, melt, and then basically be pumped back up into a freezer freeze into ice again and then, fall on a repeated nature. How long did this last? I think very, very little, right?
I was under the impression it was several months, but actually in preparation for this podcast, I rewatched Tony Baxter, or it's him and someone else, but it's mainly Tony Baxter talking about. I was during the AP event, that panel that you mentioned.
Okay, yeah.
And he says it was 6 weeks.
Okay.
I feel like the video, because I found, I think, 3 or 4 that I've used where you can see it. And I thought there were, and again, maybe someone mislabeled it, because I've seen that where someone will have a date labeled, 1972, and it'll be like, there's no way that could have been in 1972 because, it was gone by then.
Yeah.
So it could have been 6 weeks. I always thought it was like a few months. But I guess 6 weeks technically is a month and a half.
So, I mean,
not long.
Regardless, that's not long. But yeah, it's too bad because it's a very cool effect. The sound effect can still be heard in the attraction. It is something that it's not like, it's one of those things, it doesn't really feel like the attraction's missing it unless it was there. So,
but ever since I found out about it, and that was like, oddly enough, that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to start Yesterworld, among the many other, because like that kind of thing. I remember as a kid, I was like obsessed when I found out there was like an ice effect. And at the time, YouTube was kind of still in its infancy. So there weren't any videos up about it, or there weren't any videos where you could really see the effect, but I was obsessed with it. And then I remember later on, I was like, I'd love to like make a video talking about it, because no one talks about that effect. And to me, I was just like obsessed with it, and I thought I could make a channel part of which I can talk about effects that no one knew about, because a lot of people had no idea unless you happen to be on like Mice Chat obsessively, which I was back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sad that it didn't work out, and it's funny because for a long time there were just so many different reasons for why it failed. It was like, oh, the icebox was made out of titanium instead of stainless steel and it rusted. And then there was, the pipes broke. But Tony Baxter himself has said pretty much that, the ice would fall. It was dyed with iced tea to give it a more darker look. It was supposed to pull at the bottom, like you said, and be pumped up, but it would, I guess, just get stuck in the pipes and get stuck down there, or it wouldn't melt all the way or something along those lines. And it was just way too hard to fix. But if you look at certain like videos like from SoCal Attractions 360 where they have really great low light videos, and some pictures you can see, and I found one I want to use in a video. I only recently found it in a book, but you can actually see the little tiny thing, the hole in the ceiling where it would have opened up, and that's just cool. I love that kind of stuff.
Now, yeah, one thing I think that so many of us theme park nerds talk about this effect and how we miss it and that we wish we could see it. But one thing I don't think we ever really talk about is how awesome and innovative this idea was to create that effect. Because, like, whoever thought of that, I don't know if it was Tony Baxter or whomever, but whoever thought, let's use ice to simulate the rocks and then have it melt and then pump back up and freeze and repeat the process. Like, that's pretty genius.
Oh, yeah. I wish it had, because on top of it not working in terms of it building up and clumping up the pipes or whatever, it also, from the videos I've seen, and I feel like he mentioned it in another, there's 2 videos I've seen. I was trying to find the other for this, but I can't find it, and I wish I'd saved it. But I think he was talking about how, and you can see it in videos where because of the frequency of it, the refrigeration unit couldn't freeze it fast enough. Sure. That was the other problem. And so it's not the most convincing because it's very watery and it's not, it's kind of clumped together. And so but the idea of it's ingenious.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that in a perfect world where you're not having to worry about hourly load capacity, it could have worked. It would have had the time to melt. It would have had the time to freeze at the top. But you have to have it, I think, what did I say, every 18 seconds
18
or something
seconds,
ridiculous like that.
If it were a theater effect, it would have worked brilliantly.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
which it makes me wish I could go back in time to like the first year of it opening, be the first one to ride the first ride of the day and see it like, the perfect way it would have fallen down before it.
Yeah.
And, because obviously that's, ingenious, but, I don't see how they could have made that work just the frequency of having to always recycle and not, get clumped up. And,
Yeah.
But it's cool that it's still there.
Now, in the next room where all the skeletons are, I gotta say, I have never seen this. I know it's there. Have never seen the skeleton wearing the mouse ears. Have you ever seen it?
People will probably hate me for that. Well, if you have proof, I've personally have always wondered if that was a gag, because I've never seen it.
I saw a photo of it.
I've seen a photo,
yeah.
and it's a very famous photo, and I feel like either it was very temporary or maybe it was like a cast member gag, because I've never seen, other than like the photo you're mentioning, and maybe I've seen a couple others, but in the videos I've seen and from my own recollection, I don't remember ever seeing. I could be 100% wrong, and I'd gladly stand corrected, but I just wonder if it was a gag or a cast member thing, or, because that happens sometimes.
Sure.
Throw a hat on, take a picture, and everyone kind of, because back then when that rumor started, we didn't have a million videos on it already. Mm-hmm. So could be wrong. Hope I am, but...
Yeah. So now, one of the things I want to mention in this room with the giant bridge is I remember as a kid, one thing that's been tamed down considerably since the earlier years is the fire effects. There are still fire effects in there. They're still cool because pyro is awesome, but I remember much bigger flame balls as a kid. Do you have that recollection as well?
I think so. It's hard when I'm reflecting on attractions, because you never know how much is your imagination that built up something. But I do remember there being more pyro effects, I think. And of course, in that skeleton room, it was the wind chamber. I don't know if they even have much winds now. But I was gonna.
Well, the issue I have with that is you can see the giant fans. Like, they have these huge fans blowing, and sometimes your vehicle stops there. Like, that's part of the attraction. If you're not familiar with, on the Indiana Jones Adventure, not you, but the people listening, on the Indiana Jones Adventure, your vehicle will stop throughout a couple times, because at the end there's an effect where your vehicle stops, and basically you need to make sure that the vehicles don't catch up to each other. So your car will quote unquote break down in different possible locations, and one of them is like in front of a giant fan, and I'm like, I'm looking at a fan right now. Like, what are you doing?
I guess I've never stopped there to see it, but back in the day, again going by the list thing, they said it was wind speeds inside the mummy chamber rush up to 60 miles per hour, and certainly isn't 60 miles per hour today.
No. It definitely is not that fast. So I think that's been turned down. I think the fire effects have turned down. And one thing that I haven't seen work for years in this attraction that kind of blows my mind, because it seems pretty simple. When you're going over the bridge is, a floor surface. It's not a bridge it is technically a bridge, but it's not a shaky bridge at all.
Right, yeah.
But the giant ropes on the side of the bridge used to shake and move a lot, giving the illusion that the bridge was shaky. I haven't seen those things move in so many years, and I'm always baffled by that. I'm like, this is a very easy yet effective effect.
Yeah, and because there are certain effects. It's not on the list. Well, let me see if it's on wind effects. Yeah, so on the document I have, if you're interested, I could always send you a copy of it, because I love this kind of stuff. But it says... So it says wind effect, and then bug projections, which there are actual fake bugs in there. But I guess
and the headlights?
There are, like, if you see a lights on image, there were like fake bugs on the walls, but I guess supposedly people and cast members kind of picked at them over the years. But after that, it does say shaking ropes. And I always thought as a kid the bridge dropped. But then I was told later on, no, the bridge itself doesn't move. It's just that the vehicle with the shaking ropes make you feel like the bridge drop. And again, incredible illusion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it says shaking ropes, and I don't know if I remember it even working a few years ago, the last time I went.
Yeah, it hasn't worked in a very long time, which is a real bummer. And like I said, an easy fix from what I can tell, so that's kind of a bummer. But you had mentioned the bugs on the headlights, and there's that was an update that they did. That effect's always been there, but I will say for a long time, and I don't think most people really cared about this, but like me, like really enjoying certain details, I always noticed this, and it drove me crazy. So the headlights on the vehicle are very warm colored, like they're more orange than they are white light. And originally, when you went through that dark tunnel and they would shine the lights with the bugs on the headlights, it's obviously not your vehicle lights, it's a projector. And it was a very different, it was like a white light versus a warm orange light.
Right.
And then the last couple of years, I think after the whole 2017 update, they made them like the warm same color as your headlight, which really, really excited me. Like the first time I saw that, I was like, oh yes, it's now like a convincing effect. And the way that the lights blink and everything, because it actually changes from one projector to another based on when you're moving. And before it was like a steady light, and the transition from one projector to the next wasn't the greatest, and now it like flickers, and it's so beautifully done now. And I know this is a stupid little silly thing to nerd out about, but
hey, I always thought it was, in my own naivety, I always thought it was the headlights until later I'm like, yeah, I don't think they were I think it was projections, you know?
Yeah, right now it's very, very, very convincing effect.
Cool.
Beautifully done, so I love that. And
it is those, but that's the thing. It is those little details that sell an attraction, you know, and that are practical effects too. You know, that's not like you're just entering a room where the screens light up and it's just bugs or something. You know?
Yeah, yeah. So there's that. And then, of course, let's go through this a little faster. We're talking a lot here, but we get to the snake room, which there's a couple things about this room. Number one, I've heard the story that George Lucas never liked this room because he always felt that, you know, in his indie films, there were never like any fantastical creatures. There weren't giant, massive snakes that don't exist in real life. And Tony Baxter had to convince him and be like, listen, we could put thousands of real size snakes in here and people wouldn't notice them. We need this thing to really scare people.
I never thought of it that way. But that's true. That is really the only exaggerated, you know, you would never see that in an indie. You can see everything else in the ride in an indie movie except for that, really, because you wouldn't see a giant, well, maybe in the fourth one, which we don't speak, I don't like to talk about the fourth one, but in the originals, you wouldn't see a giant snake. But I never thought of that. It's really interesting.
I'm also shocked that there's no photo op there. That seems like the place where the photo would snap, you know?
Don't give them the idea. I don't want to. They're going to hear this and be like,
listen,
he's right.
I agree.
Throw in a giant flash. You know?
Yeah, it shouldn't be there, but I'm surprised it's not. I find that is interesting as well.
I wouldn't be surprised if they planned it at some point. I really wouldn't if maybe they planned it and maybe it just didn't work out.
Well,
That'd be interesting.
It very much reminds me of the scene in Dinosaur with the Carnotaurus where it stops and flashes.
Right.
Like your vehicle stops for a moment there, has its thing, and then it happens.
Yeah.
So. Now, something that drives me a little bit crazy at this moment in the attraction, because as we've been talking about, everything's very like real life. You're part of the story. Anything that's happening could happen. Except in this moment, we hear Indiana Jones's voice in the vehicle and don't see him. And that has always driven me crazy. We hear
never thought about that.
Snakes,
but I see what you mean.
You're on your own. It's like every other time we hear Indy's voice, it's coming through the speakers in the car, but he's there in front of us.
Because what did he do? Like hitch a ride and then get off after to go up to the boulder? I never thought of that, but that's very strange because usually they're very narratively conscious about breaking the story. But that is kind of strange. Like he would have to be in your vehicle or whispering in your ears as you got to that point.
He's dragging on the back of the vehicle. I don't know. I it's almost as if kind of like, you know, we're talking about the ice rocks falling and the sound effect is still there even though the effect isn't. It's almost as if there was an indie animatronic there that was removed or something. Now that's not the case, but or maybe he was intended to be there initially. I don't know, but I always find that to be
that could be it. Maybe there was going to be an indie animatronic or something, but I never thought of that. But that's something that's really interesting. It's one of those things that I hear a million times, but I never thought like narratively how that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. Am I ruining the attraction for you? I'm sorry.
Half and half. Half of me is like dying to go on. Half of me is now it's going to drive me crazy. I'm going to be like, oh, that voice. But it makes sense. It's his iconic line. So they probably were like, we have to get it in here somewhere, you know?
I guess, but at the same time, if it wasn't there, I don't think anybody would. It's not like we're like, what's this? Oh, it's a snake. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, they definitely, you know, it could be one of those things because, you know, they definitely composed the soundtrack with that in mind because the music swells and and then it quiets, it gets that for him to say the line, and then it swells again. So I don't know, maybe they had something planned, and they're like, oh, we already composed the music, and we can't put an indie animatronic because he won't scale compared to the snake. Oh, I'll just leave it in there, you know?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, too. The scale of Indy next to the snake would be problematic. One thing you touched upon just now that we haven't even talked about, but the score to this attraction...
Oh, it's incredible.
...is among my favorites. Like, this is easily one you put on in the car, drive to Disneyland... And
it's my alarm clock, believe it or not.
Is it really?
At the moment, kind of got me in the indie spirit the other day. I was like looking at, kind of refreshing on a few of the facts, and I was like, I'm going to make it my alarm clock.
That's fantastic. Now, after the snake, of course, we head into that room with the really cheap effect of the scrim and the black light and the giant scream, which I don't think most people notice it. It's hokey, but
it doesn't work half the time for me. At least
really?
It didn't work at least I always felt it not never, but as an annual pass holder for many years, I remember I'd always look up and it just wouldn't light up. I'd hear it, but maybe they fixed it.
I think they fixed it back in 2017. It happens. I don't think most people are looking up at that point. So I just don't think that many people see it. I always find it to be a kind of silly effect. It just looks... It's cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap. What would I say? It's just cheap.
But to be fair, like, this is kind of the point in the attraction, other than the Boulder Room, where it kind of feels like they ran out of money. Like, let's start there with that cheesy scream effect. And then we go into, essentially, dark pathways. Like, it's just black. And then we get to...
But if I can really quick, because it's something that's always, and I'm curious to hear your opinion. I've always heard, and it's one of those rumor things, and I've yet to see any visual evidence of it. There are so many rumors that I've read where there was a waterfall that cascaded from this Mara skull's mouth, and then I've read people they swear by this, that originally the attraction opened and the lava pit actually had like water to look as if it was molten lava. I have never seen it. I've seen plenty. And again, it's one of those things I'm happy to be proven wrong, because I wanted to, like, in my abandoned effects video, I was trying to find it. I never found anything with a waterfall. I never found any photos, even opening day photos, promotional photos. There was fog. There was more fog and smoke effects that covered the molten lava, so the lighting made it look more like it was, like a fiery pit. But I've never found any evidence that it was water or that any kind of liquid was down there beyond just like fog machines. I don't know if you've heard anything for or against that.
I believe that is people remembering it differently than it actually was. I would love for that to be true as well, because I'm not going to lie, they're definitely, I drive by that and I'm like, this looks like plastic. Like it doesn't, it's not an effect. I get what they're going for. It's fine. You're driving by it very quickly, but it's not effective. I would love for that to just be water. And frankly, that seems like a simple thing to do, to have water and bubbles and some lights.
So I never knew if it was people remembering it incorrectly, but I will say there used to be more fog that covered up the plastic, because it used to be, from the photos I've seen as well, like you saw the red kind of shining through the fog, but you didn't see like literally the plastic. So I would love to see evidence for it, but I have to kind of squash those rumors whenever I read about it, because I can't find any visual evidence of it.
Yeah, if anybody has video or photo of water in there, send an email, disneycoasttocoast@gmail.com. But yeah, I don't remember that. But then we head into the black tunnels. It's black. They ran out of money. And then we get to the rats going across the branch on the mist screen, which is a really bad effect at this point. Cool back in the day.
Does it work?
Not really.
To me, it never does. And it has to do with the there's too many people going through that the smoke can't build up enough to where the projection can be clear. Once in a while it works, and when it works it's really cool, but it's so rare.
18 seconds is not enough for it to reset properly. And so it's basically if there was an issue and a huge gap between vehicles for some reason, that you'll get it. But it's not a great effect. And frankly, it's like, what is it supposed to be? Like, we're running into a branch of rats. Like, why does it disappear? I don't know. I've never...
Why is this branch randomly lit up in pure darkness, I guess?
It's interesting. But then we get to the hallway of the darts being shot back and forth, which the air blowing past you, which is cool. But once again, like, I legitimately think they just ran out of money at this point, because all of those skeletons are painted on the wall in black light. And I'm a little surprised that even today they haven't updated it and put, some sort of form molding of skeletons there to replace the paintings. So
yeah, I guess that section always did kind of perplex me, because even when you look at, like, I had a T-shirt as a kid that had the skeletons, and I have an alarm clock. I don't collect a ton of Disney stuff, but as a teenager, I collected pretty much every item from the 10th anniversary in 2005, where they had like a Mickey figure and sculptures, and like those are my prized possessions, because you just can't find them anywhere. But yeah, so they had those skeletons, and they were like 3D in these, and like the clock I have. So it is weird to just have it be a flat, almost going back to like a Fantasyland dark ride.
Yeah,
for a 1995 big budget attraction. It always struck me as kind of strange.
Yeah, but then we get arguably the greatest effect in the entire attraction when we turn the corner. We see an animatronic Indiana Jones hanging above our heads, and this is the boulder scene. Now, I'm going to ruin the effect. I'm sure most people probably know how it works at this point, but what it feels like is your vehicle's backing up and the boulder's coming toward you, and then you drive below the boulder. Well, if you don't know, the reality is that your vehicle is just shaking. It's not backing up at all, but the walls are moving forward, making it look like they're moving away from you as if you're backing up, and then the boulder moves toward you. It's a great, wonderful, effective effect when it works. It's always a bummer. That's the one thing in the attraction that I can forgive other things not working properly. That's the one that I'm like, if that's not working, I feel like I got gypped. Well,
it's the climax, it's the finale, and the easiest way to tell the effect, literally just turn around. Yeah. Like that's because you can literally see that you're not moving, the track's not moving, and you see the walls. Yeah. That's the easiest way to see how it works. For me, it usually works, but I know that once in a while it doesn't, and it's just awkward. Yeah.
And sometimes it'll happen where like the walls don't move, but the boulder still does, and that's always a little bit weird as well. Because just like,
but amazing again, and ingenious effect to whoever came up with that. I don't even.
Do you know the story of how that was figured out?
I do not.
Oh, okay. I don't know if it was Tony Baxter or a different Imagineer. I always assume it's Tony since he was the head Imagineer in this, but it may have been somebody else involved. But they were in one of those car washes where your vehicle doesn't move and the walls move around you. And if you've ever experienced that, it feels like you'll look and be like, oh my gosh, is my car in park or not? Because it feels like you're rolling. And that's how they came up with the idea for that effect, which I think is...
It's always those kinds of random things. It's not always just sitting in a room devising how things work. It's just getting your car washed, and then you come up with one of the most brilliant illusions of attraction history.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the attraction. Then we see Indy one final time. He has, I think, 7 different sayings as he's standing next to the destroyed boulder. And then you go to the unload area, and you've just experienced one of the greatest attractions I think Walt Disney Imagineering's ever created. I think it's wonderful.
There was an original effect when Indiana Jones, with the boulders crashing out. I think it was just done via like smoke and fog. And if maybe it's still there and just not as subtle, but it's always referenced as like a dust effect. And it was supposed to be as if the boulder had literally, and you can hear the boulder crash as you're going down, that it had literally just come through the wall, and that there was supposed to be like this dust effect that would surround him coming out from the boulder. And it's listed in the manual.
They still shoot fog out of the boulder.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, because for a long time it never seemed to work for me, to where it seemed like it just seemed like fog. But I guess it used to be much more convincing.
Well, yeah, it definitely still feels like fog. But yeah, that's the way I've always seen it. So it is a great attraction. One thing I do want to touch upon that we didn't really touch upon, actually, there's a few problems I have with this attraction. I know we've already talked about a few of them, but I kind of want to get your opinion about it. And one of them is the enhanced motor vehicle, which is brilliant. That's the ride vehicle that, if listeners don't know, you're basically rolling flat the entire time, but the vehicle is designed in a way that it can move in many different directions, making it feel like a bumpy road or like you're taking a sharp turn or whatever they want to do. And that's an amazing, amazing effect if you're sitting on the vehicle. And that is why I've always found it very strange that in the attraction, when you turn that corner for the first time and see the giant room with the bridge, you can see another, if it's timed properly, you see another vehicle going across it. And it basically shows you the entire effect. I find that strange. And also, and a lot of the marketing tools for this attraction, they show wide shots of the vehicle driving and it shows you the effect. And I'm like, why are you showing us this? Why can I see this while on the ride? Because you're basically, it's like going to see David Copperfield and him telling you how he's doing his illusions. And I've always found that very, very strange, and I'm curious if that's bothered you.
It's one of those things I've never thought about, but you're right, because there are a lot of the promos and the TV spots would show the TV spots are amazing because they exaggerate every aspect of the ride, and it's hilarious. But I would guess it's just maybe they were more trying to show off the scale. The fact that, like, here's a huge ride vehicle and it's just this tiny, like, maybe it's about scale, or maybe they just wanted to, I don't know if were there any attractions up to that point where you would visually see other people experiencing the ride and for you to be like, I'm going to get to that part where I'm going to be on the bridge and I'm going to be in front of Mara. And that's the only thing I can think of.
It is a cool reveal, like I've said. I don't know. It just seems a little bit. It
gives movement. It gives movement maybe to the scene, because if it was just a static, chamber,
if those ropes were consistently shaking, I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a little nitpicky thing, but I've always felt like they shot themselves in the foot a little bit by doing that.
Makes you wonder if it was intentional, if it just the timing didn't work out, and they're like, okay, we might as well include it in the promos because they're going to see it, or if it was made that way by design to see.
It definitely seems like it was designed so that you would see a vehicle cross as you turn the corner, because like you said, it's a great reveal, and seeing that vehicle go across is pretty cool. But I don't know, there's something about seeing how the effect works that has always bothered me.
Maybe the ropes used to move enough to where you wouldn't be able to tell as easily that the vehicle itself was the one doing the movement.
Possibly, but then they still do it in the promo videos. I don't know. It's a weird thing. Like I said, super nitpicky on my part. Another thing about the vehicle that I find strange is how the vehicle reacts to things happening in the attraction. So like when the snake jumps out at you, like your vehicle retracts, and same with the spears going back and forth. Your vehicle kind of like dodges, not in like a way a car would, but more in the way that a human would. And I've always been like, why is our car like superhuman in 1935? Like that's always kind of bothered.
They're really putting money on the fact that I guess maybe that you're moving with it, so then it exaggerates your movement. But I see if you're just still, you're going to be like, why am I lurching to the left and the dodging? Why is my vehicle? Was it Knight Rider? Is that what's going on? Where he's like
Yeah. And then there's one other thing with this attraction that this is most attractions, to be honest, and it's. I really don't like it when the problem starts immediately. So like this attraction starts and it's like, boom, you looked into her eyes, you're screwed. And that's the rest of your journey. And I always feel like one of the best examples of an attraction that in my mind does it right. And I get it. This comes down to space and budget and everything. But I've always appreciated the Jurassic Park ride for the fact that the first half of that attraction is what is what you're supposed to, is what you signed up for, quote unquote, right? Yeah. You're visiting Jurassic Park. And then the crap hits the fan and you're backstage and everything goes wrong. And I wish more attractions were that way. And I wish Indiana Jones Adventure was that way. Like, how cool would it be if we were just taking a tour of the cave and then we come across Mara and then everything goes wrong?
I never thought of that. I'm trying to think because Jurassic Park is a great example of that, where it's so pleasant and nice and the dinosaurs and the music swells, and then it adds a little bit more tension and it's very, it's like a curve. It's not like you're going through the land and then all the trouble starts. Like it's a little suspicious with the broken out raptor cage, and then a little bit more with the car fall. So it's a very,
it's gradual.
Yeah, it's gradual. Yeah. Whereas Indy, it's like boom. I'm trying to think if there are any other attractions where it's gradual.
Pirates of the Caribbean does a really beautiful job at Disneyland, where the Blue Bayou scene is very calm and pleasant. Then you go down the fall and at first it's just caves. There's not even any skeletons. It's just caves. And then there's another fall. Then you're seeing skeletons. Okay, that's a little bit more gradual. And then you're in the full-fledged story.
Right.
So I feel like Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland does a fantastic job with that. But yeah, it's in most cases, it's like...
Could the queue be part of that? The queue, in a weird way, could be the you're exploring a forgotten temple. If they're including that in the experience as a whole,
Sure.
In a way, you could kind of say maybe that's like the grotto comparison.
I wouldn't disagree with that. My argument would be that there's too many alternatives now. There's Fast Pass, there's Single Rider, so not everybody's getting that experience, but I would agree that that's probably how they justify it in their minds. But I don't know. It's just something in general. And like I said, it costs more money to have more scenes. So why waste scenes on the non-adventurous part of the attraction is probably how most of them look at that. So yeah, I don't know. It's all very interesting. There's one thing I want to touch upon before we get to some trivia here, and that is about Mara. And I am curious, is Mara male or female in your mind?
I actually looked that up prior to this because I didn't want to use the wrong term and have people be like, no, it's a male. No, it's... I don't know. Like, I came across a poll, and it was pretty 50-50. It was male, female, goddess, god. I'm always... Or deity. Deity is the term I guess they use in the manual. And I was looking through my fact sheet, and it just says, deity. It never says him or her. I don't know. I guess my vote would be a him just because James Earl Jones voices Mara.
Okay.
And I feel like,
So I've always felt that the character feels female, but you're right. The voice is male. And tell me if you've ever heard this story, because I've heard that originally there was, I don't think I'd ever opened with this, but I think originally they recorded it as a female voiceover artist. And with the volume in that chamber, like that high-pitched female voice became ear-piercing. And so they had to re-record it, and I've heard it's James Earl Jones. And then at one point, this is according to Wikipedia, or Indiana Jones Wiki. Mara was originally voiced by James Earl Jones in Indiana Jones Adventure, but was temporarily replaced with the new vocals of Neil Patrick Harris? What?
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah, I thought I knew where you were going because that did not the Neil Patrick. Well, okay.
I was going to say the NPH thing does not sound right to me. So I'm kind of doubting Indiana Jones Wiki on this.
When they redid the map projections, because I think it was in a couple phases. It didn't go from the original effect to now. There was like an in between. But at one point they did redo the voice. And it was much higher pitched. It was almost like this kind of voice. Like it wasn't deep, but it wasn't high. And people went nuts. And I've heard it, and it sounds really bizarre.
It's weird. I don't remember that at all. It's just weird. I've written that thing a billion times.
If I can find, I know I have a video of it because I've heard it. It was probably only a couple months. It was very short, but then people were just flipped out. They're like, "What? You removed James Earl Jones?" And so they were trying to make it more feminine. But I don't know if I agree with the Neil Patrick Harris. Maybe he's a huge Disney fan though, so I want to hear more about that.
But why would they change it? Like, of all the things to update or change in Indiana Jones, why would you be like, let's change the voice of Mara, who honestly I didn't even know was James Earl Jones, but makes total sense. Like,
maybe to, like you said, it's the deity appears very feminine. Like, so maybe they were like, we're redoing the map projection, so we might as well match up to how people see this. Goddess or god. It's such a weird thing because there doesn't seem to be an official answer, but I know for sure they did change the voice for a time. I just really would be skeptical if it was Neil Patrick Harris. It seems very bizarre, especially for them to remove it and be like, oh, sorry, Neil, we're going back to James, It's
weird. Anyway, anything else? I have so many notes here that honestly we could go into so many conversations, but I feel like we've gone on a good long while about this, so maybe you'll have to come on, and because actually one of my notes here was one of their marketing tools, and I'm thinking maybe around next Super Bowl time, you'll have to come back on and we'll talk about the Super Bowl halftime show that was Indiana Jones themed. That's a whole separate thing. But is there anything you want to add about this attraction before we get to some trivia?
The only quick thing I'll add, because I didn't know about it until somewhat recently, but originally, and this was gone before cast member it was cut pretty early on to where it's not even in the manual, but enough sources have come out and said, yes, I worked on the attraction, so that I do believe it's true. But right before the spike room, they have the diamonds on the floor, right, where in Raiders you step on it and an arrow comes in. Supposedly, one of them, and you can kind of tell which one it could have been, but one of the diamonds, it was raised, I think it's like a half inch off the ground. And if you stepped on it, then one of the blocks from the ceiling, not the spike room, but one of the blocks in that room would fall down a bit. And I've heard this was cut, one, because people kept tripping over it when they were testing it. And then two, they were worried that like if parents had their kids on their shoulders, that they might bump into it. But from what I've read enough accounts of it to where it does seem that was at some point planned and implemented, but then just cut before it opened, even for like previews. But and it makes sense, because why would you have those diamonds on the floor if you weren't going to have it be some sort of interactive, experience?
Yeah, I am a little surprised they kept the signs up though that say like "Don't step on the diamonds." Considering it doesn't do anything now, I'm a little surprised they didn't take it down. But yeah, there are those fun little trigger effects in the queue with the spike ceiling, and of course the "Don't pull the rope," and you hear the people down there screaming. So it's fun. But anyway, folks, that's enough about Indiana Jones Adventure. So let's get to some trivia. That means it's trivia time. All right, would you like to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I guess I'll hit you up with a quick one, because you might know this since you mentioned the promo, but I was going to ask, do you know which two original cast members from Raiders of the Lost Ark appeared in the television special?
Yeah, so, am I going to get these names right? Karen Allen, is that her name?
Yes, I believe so.
Who played, what character did she play?
Marion
in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the actor who plays Sala.
Yeah, John Rhys Davies.
Yeah, now
that's an easy. That was because again, I said I didn't know how much we would cover, so I didn't want to have a brilliant trivia piece about the smoke effect and then us talk about it and then ruin that.
No, well, here's something really interesting about the whole character of Sala in the attraction is obviously they hired the actor to come in, shoot this promotional preview thing that was on TV. He's also in the pre-show in the short film that we're talking about in the projection room. Yet it is not his voice in the projection room. It is a voiceover actor emulating him. That is so weird to me. It's a great match.
Not in the film.
No, not in the film for TV. That was the actor. But in the projection room, where it's like stills of him, it's actually a different voice actor who performs that brilliantly voiced match.
I never knew that, and it would have fooled me because I always thought it was him.
It's the voice, the new voice of the Disneyland Railroad. It's that voice actor whose name I'm forgetting. But he is the voice.
Well, that blows my mind a bit.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. So I've always found that interesting. I'm like, you've gone through the trouble of hiring this person. The only thought I had was they had him for this period of time to shoot the special and take the photos for the projection room, but they didn't have the script written yet. That's my only guess. But it's
so when he says like,
don't look into the eyes of Mara.
Yeah.
Like that's not the actor.
That is very interesting. Yeah, and a lot of those things when I did the Great Movie Ride, I discovered that they're so particular with licenses and like how much they're willing to give vocal tracks to, like based on agreements where it's like, oh, I only agreed to do this, and then they ask for more money. Who knows if that's the case, but possibly. I don't know, maybe it was a weird licensing thing.
Yeah, this is not your trivia question, but since you mentioned the Great Movie Ride, you must know, if you just did an episode about it, who voiced Dorothy in that.
I do not know, sadly. I don't know. I assumed it wasn't Oh, wait, no. Wait, yes, I did come across that. Oh, not Liza Minnelli. Oh,
you got it. Liza.
Yeah,
Liza Minnelli.
Okay.
Judy Garland's daughter.
Right, because I read that because my mind immediately went to Arrested Development when I read that little tidbit, because that's where I know her from. I was like, really? But that's the hard thing about doing those episodes where it could be a 4-hour long thing.
Yeah.
Where you point out every little tiny person, because some of them were the actual voices, some weren't. But yeah, well, I kind of had it right.
Yeah, it's not Lisa. It's funny that you said Liza Minnelli, because Liza Minnelli, I'm a big fan. She actually has a whole song about her name, and the lyrics are, it's Liza with a Z, not Lisa with an S.
Because one's a comedian, right? And
Comedian?
or the other.
No. So people call Liza Lisa. That used to be the whole thing before she was like quote unquote famous. She's been famous almost her whole life because of her mom. But the joke was, my name's Liza Minnelli, but people call me Lisa Minnelli. So it's Liza with a Z, not Lisa with an S, because Lisa with an S goes snot zitsy instead of S, Lie instead of Lee. It's simple. This can be C Liza. So she has a whole song about it. So I think it's funny that you said Liza Minnelli. Anyway, here's your real trivia. Which 3 attractions did Lucasfilm work on with Walt Disney Imagineering before Indiana Jones Adventure?
Star Tours. Mm-hmm. Couldn't have been Alien Encounter. Captain EO.
Yes.
I'm trying to think.
It's related to today's topic.
It wouldn't have been... Oh, wait. Well, I guess it would have opened before the Indiana Jones stunt show?
Yeah.
No, wait.
The Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular opened in 1989. And Adventure is 1995. So, yep, those are the 3. And I also want to, just some fun little fact I came across. I was reading this. This was from D23, the official Disney fan club. But they said there's an unlikely connection between our favorite explorer, meaning Indiana Jones, and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. The classic Disney Parks coaster was actually one of the inspirations for the runaway mine car sequence in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Do the mine car sound effects from the film sound familiar? Some of the sound effects heard in the film were actually recorded at Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in Disneyland.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
It's funny how things come full circle, you know?
Yeah, well, especially since, like, at the time of this attraction, Disney certainly didn't own Lucasfilm, and now they own the character, and they seem to keep doing more and more with it, so it's...
Speaking of mine, I will say this, because this has always been another trivia thing that's bothered me. There's, because obviously the car... or the truck outside of Temple of Forbidden Eye is actually from the movie Raiders.
Yep.
But I've seen a lot of claims that there's like it doesn't even to me look like it's a mine train cart, but there's always said, oh, it's from Temple of Doom, but it's not. And if you compare them, they don't look anything alike. But for some reason, whenever I look at trivia, they always say the truck is from Raiders and the mine cart is from Temple of Doom. But if you compare them, they don't look at all similar, unless it was like just part of it or something.
Now, here's the interesting thing about that. First of all, D23, the official Disney fan club, mentioned that as well, but they're saying it is the mine car from Temple of Doom. So clearly they're wrong. They've got bad information. And
maybe I'm right.
And then the whole Raiders vehicle, Steven Spielberg supposedly claims it's not from the movie. It's not it. But then everybody else says it is. So
yeah, Tony Baxter says it is.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There seems to be a little bit of confusion when it comes to those. Let's just pretend they are from the film. It makes it more exciting. But I tend to agree with the Raiders vehicle and not the Temple of Doom.
Right.
But
because it makes more sense, because over at MGM, which came out before the ride, they had, one of the original tanks and a few of the original cars from Last Crusade, a few of the motorbikes. So it makes sense that, and it may have even been on the back lot at one point.
Yeah.
So if they have those vehicles, it's not too far of a stretch. And they even had some of them, and that's another thing in the, I won't go too on it, but at MGM Studios, when they had the studio showcase initially with the movie props and stuff, they had the mine train carts from Temple of Doom in there.
Huh.
So, but again, they don't look anything like the one outside of Temple of Forbidden Eye. So,
yeah.
Who knows? I mean,
very interesting. Anyway, this has been a deep dive into Indiana Jones Adventure, Temple of the Forbidden Eye. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Mark. And why don't you let the folks know where they can find you in the work that you do on Yesterworld?
Yeah, so you can find me. First of all, thanks again for having me. I love talking about anything theme park related, anything Disney park related, and especially my favorite attraction. So it was a blast. You can find me at youtube.com/Yesterworld Entertainment. You can find me on Twitter at Yester_world. And I believe that's also my Instagram. You can also find my friend Quinn, who's also been producing episodes on the channel as well. You can find him on Twitter at Yesterworld_Q. So it's pretty much mine, just with an extra _Q with it, because he's on Twitter as well.
Did you mention the podcast as well? You have a Yesterworld podcast?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's always getting after me for not plugging it, because I'm terrible at plugging myself. But yeah, so it used to be very infrequent, but for the last couple months, we've been working on a weekly podcast, and it's just called the Yesterworld Podcast. It's on iTunes and Spotify. And it's just it's a hodgepodge of news, and then just if we happen to work on, like with Great Movie Ride, I did that episode, so then we talked about a little more of a deep dive beyond maybe what the episode covers. And then we'll cover some movie stuff. We just did a spoiler episode on Avengers, so don't click on that if you haven't seen the movie. But yeah, so we're on iTunes and Spotify, and it's a work in progress, but it's been really fun to explore a different avenue aside from just YouTube.
And folks, I truly cannot suggest the YouTube channel enough. It is fantastic Disney and theme park history in general. Of course, if you want to find our social media, head over to DisneyCoastToCoast.com. And if you're enjoying the show, consider becoming part of the DCTC community over on Patreon, where you can get behind-the-scenes access, Q&A live streams, early episode releases, and you could even be a guest on Trivia Time and so much more. All of that starts for just $1. So head over to patreon.com/DisneyCTC. That's patreon.com/DIZNEYCTC. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.